Thanks a lot for the kind introduction. So, yeah, I'm a telecommunication security expert. Basically, I joined the dark side last year, so I became a consultant, basically a brain for hire. And actually, how I found 5G Territory was last year through the recordings of the 5G Territory. And I thought, hey, that's a cool event. Actually, people know what they are talking about, so I need to be there. So, and here I am. So that's how things go. So, and now we live in a world that changes. We see ships get stuck in channels, supply chain disruptions. We see cables that break for whatever reasons. We see denial of service attacks on governmental websites, services. We see floods, we see storms and things like that. And on the other hand, we see that we hook up our own lives and everything to 5G communication. So we use 5G for banking, for finding our path in the city, the nearest coffee shop, whatever. So, and that means, or even if you enter a bus, I noticed here in the buses you have these little USB slots to charge your phone in the bus so that you can pay actually the ticket. So we are dependent on 5G. And on the other hand, we live in a world where the risks become greater. And we need to think about what can we do when disaster strikes. And the best thing is to think about it before things happen and not afterwards. So in this panel, I think I have an excellent panel here because 5G, as you probably figured out, it uses many different technologies and it has many connection points to other things, which also means every connection point is an open door for an attacker. So, and here in this panel, I have people from all corners of the network, I would call that. So let me introduce my panel, and maybe I start here with Olaf Heisch. He's director at Target Account Management for Infrastructure. Maybe you can introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah, thank you very much, Silke. Yes, so I'm Olaf, and I'm with Rohde and Schwarz since 12 years. Before that, Nokia Networks and Siemens Networks, developing all the stuff from 2G up to 5G. But in the same way, from Rohde and Schwarz perspective, we can see on how the world is moving. And that's the reason why we started to define a new market segment, so-called critical infrastructure and networks, including all those aspects of public safety, critical networks, mission critical, and so on. And this covers, for example, different flavors. So whether talking about not only the cellular business, or let's say the cellular market, in the same way air traffic control and so on, we can see a lot of stuff in this direction for unmanned drone applications and so on, these things. But the entire part of 5G, MNT mobile network testing as well from the early beginning when it comes to the network planning, the rollout. We talked a lot about site installation. We mentioned yesterday, for example, the situation in Ukraine, about 4,000, 5,000 base stations destroyed and so on. So we have to think about that. And how to cope with it, how to support these things along the line. And that's what we are looking for.
Yeah. I think Rohde and Schwarz is really a sort of well-known factor when it comes to radios and radio measurements and things like that. I mean, you're a business sort of ages. I remember when sort of starting my studies long ago.
90 years, right?
In the 90s, yeah. So, but that's radio. So I'm very happy that we covered that. So, and then we have, of course, Palo Alto Networks. You're also famous, but in another corner sort of the network. So, Pietro Linke, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm one of the mobility consultants, mobile network security consultants at Palo Alto Networks. I work in a service provider overlay over the local team. We had Edgar's and Didzo's over here. I have a strong, let's say, telecommunication background and also IT security. I left it because the 3G was boring. And I basically joined the IT security forces out there to work on financial institutions and so on and so on. And then I came back to the business when the 5G was a big thing to come, basically. So Palo Alto was looking for someone who would know both security and mobility. And now for the last 6 years at Palo Alto, I'm mostly working with network equipment providers like the Nokias and Ericssons of the world and the smaller ones on basically embedding our products into their blueprints. And also customers globally. So whenever there is a customer who's basically trying to have a second opinion on the proposed architectures, and then they basically invite us.
Okay, that's very interesting to see. Just a side question, are you also doing sort of private network businesses? Sort of dealing with private network customers?
Yeah, it's
Okay,
both.
okay.
It's service providers and the enterprises.
Okay.
It depends. When they own the spectrum, then some of them, they are capable of deploying their own 5G network, private 5G network. But if they are not, then they are basically just buying connectivity as a service from service providers. And then it is the service provider who's managing the private 5G on behalf of the customer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Then we have Peter Ivanov from Google, and as many people here may know, Google is basically the cloud provider for major network vendors for the radio access network, so a very important cornerstone in the 5G ecosystem. And we have here Peter is the CE of Key Account Engagement Manager, so maybe you can introduce yourself.
Thank you, Silke. Actually, you was talking about the different corners, and I'm sitting on the center. That's what Google Cloud actually is doing. People need to understand that 5G is one of the technologies for access, but behind that there is data centers and where all of this information is managed. So I'm responsible for the key customers, among them many telcos. In Central Eastern Europe. What is interesting to share with all of you that now with AI coming, the things are becoming even more interesting on the core. Let me put it that way. So thank you very much to allow me to be part of this panel.
Thanks a lot. So, and then we have Matthias Gerlich from Frequentis. He's expert and senior business development manager and is basically representing also the critical customers, which ask the nasty requirements to all the other panelists here.
Yeah, that's true. Frequentis, first of all, it's a company. We are in the mission critical sector. So what we are serving is clients like in the public transport, air defense, public safety, but also in a market called ATM, air traffic management and air traffic control, which is a very sensitive market, as you can imagine. Bringing you guys, bringing your families, your loved ones from one gate to another gate over the air in a tube is a very conservative market. So when you look into the, let's say, the commercial market today and technologies that are there already, it's not that our markets, the ATM markets, do not understand these technologies, but due to the fact that we're dealing in a very critical environment, we are looking what's going on in these markets. We are opening up certain infrastructures now, but still, if things are working very nicely, guiding an aircraft from the gate over the taxi process to the runway, starting, landing, and en route, it's difficult to convince the regulators, the customers, that's the air navigation service providers, to jump on new technologies. Nothing the less, we need to do that. There's requirements for higher data rates, for new applications, and that brings a lot of challenges with it. And yeah, these are the things that we try to consult, help the customers to get ready for these new things in the future.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think this legacy aspect is a very important one, sort of how to integrate and have a proper evolution path. I think we also heard in the previous panel on the challenges with regard to conservative customers, and there were gloves, I think, were suggested there. I'm not sure that this is the right approach, but but evolution paths and legacy technology is very important also from a security point of view. And now we have next panel member, that's Roland Kor from INEA. He's Vice President and Head of Government Relationships. And he probably can tell us later on a lot about real attack scenarios that are ongoing every day. So.
Yeah, I'll be glad to, Silke, thank you. And actually to echo your last point on on the importance of legacy security issues. That's something I wish to highlight as something that we can't lose sight of, even as we grapple with everything that's new in the 5G world. My company, ENEA, is a specialist software provider for telecom and cybersecurity, and amid a range of solutions from traffic and data management and Wi-Fi to cybersecurity. On the security side, we deal with threats involving messaging and voice-related scams, smishing and vishing, to state-level threats, ranging from espionage to other cyber surveillance threats and targeting. And it's the work of our threat intelligence unit that I'll be speaking to today, and insights from that work that I'm actually delighted to share as part of this conversation today.
Thanks a lot, which brings me basically to the first point of this panel. And the thing is, okay, disaster strikes. And the first thing, if a disaster strikes, is to figure it out. So something is happening. And we have here basically all the corners, including the middle of the network. So let me ask you sort of what kind of threat and unexpected event do you have in your area? So maybe just start here. So we don't need to take a proper order or anything. So, but let's just start here. So what kind of things do you detect? What are specific things you see and or have experienced in your career, sort of? What kind of disruptions and things like that?
So I think from an RF perspective, I think we are very, very clear keen in terms of the radio KPIs regarding, let's say, the link budget situation down to the field and from the field up to the base station, whatever it is, for example, air traffic control base station or maybe base station for 5G. And I think we know about, let's say, the complete list of KPIs for the radio layer. And what makes Rohde and Schwarz very, very powerful to that is we are able to, let's say, to receive the signal, to detect the signal in different flavors. And we are absolutely able to decode the signal, which allows us to interpret what's going on there outside. That's what we can guarantee, for example, in real time. And for example, having detected the signals, as I mentioned, in different flavors, we can localize the signals. We can interpret the signals according to the 3GPP specification or maybe some other specification, as we know. And we can give a kind of interpretation, recommendation to whomever and so on, saying the countermeasures could be like this, A, B, C, and so on. I think that's a very, very clear principle on the radio side. In connection to the backbone, by having specific, let's say, analytics tools in place in addition. I think it's very powerful from a real end-to-end perspective. And in terms of, let's say, disasters, or let's say when disaster strikes and so on, to find out anomaly detections and these things, so as a very, very clear predictive measures.
Okay, I see. Do you think that 5G, the technologies in that area need to be fine-tuned? Because, for example, 5G is much more susceptible. For example, if you have winter and you have snow, for example, or you have the trees with leaves, then this changes actually the radio sort of. And the previous generations weren't so susceptible to these kind of things. So, so you evolve also with these kind of, let's say, challenges.
Yeah. So I think for us a very, very important topic, very, very clear, is the base station itself, on the roof of the building or wherever and so on. And you are right, wind load and so on, these things around, and so everything can be very, very critical. We are talking about a new generation of base station, including, let's say, the active antenna beamforming and so on. The complexity in front of the, let's say, in front of the base station is much more. And another aspect, former times we had a very, very clear situation for disasters and so on. We have had a kind of connectivity, the connectivity to the base station or maybe to the other nodes. Right now we have to guarantee all those things over the air. Okay. And over the air, let's say, test and measurement concepts in this sense are, let's say, much more complex. And we have to face this fact. And we have to be able to dig very, very deep into the technical details in order to guarantee a kind of countermeasure, for example, to detect the error, whatever.
Okay, thanks. I think that's very important, especially for these kind of natural events. But let's go now, Mara, sort of to the to basically GTP, sort of, or let's say user plane and things like that, because a lot of things are happening there, especially now that we have a lot of IoT devices and not just sort of normal subscription. So I think, I'm not sure sort of how the ratio is between normal subscription and IoT description nowadays, but I think everybody agrees that these IoT descriptions are sort of going up. So what can you tell us there?
Yes, so we are mostly focused on cybersecurity threats, okay? And we are, first of all, looking into, just like you said, the user plane, okay? We are just looking into what's coming from the radio towards the core network. By placing security products over there, we are able to basically identify in real time the subscriber ID.
Just a short interruption for those people who don't know. Telco networks, they have two planes. One is the user plane, which is basically if you browse and data and so on, and they have a control plane, which gives you an IP address, sets up a call and so on. And we are just talking now about the user plane, so
Yeah.
sorry.
Most service providers, they just encrypt the user plane as soon as possible, and then they just send it intact to the customers. And without a proper inspection, because the encryption is basically blocking the inspection. You have to decrypt, inspect, and either send it encrypted as it was or encrypt it again. It takes time. It's introducing delays. But basically the inspection is able to help with identifying precisely in real time which device basically send the malicious traffic, okay? Which device is trying to basically send a signaling storm, for example, from on the signaling plane, okay? Which device is basically maybe participating in a botnet, is doing some sort of a DDoS, it is trying to download a malware, it is generating a malicious DNS request to resolve something, and so on and so on. So to react basically, because the OT, IoT connected devices for a mobile service provider, they are a threat. Because there's a couple of them, if they start generating traffic and there is some sort of a small, undersized, maybe a radio station, they can take out basically the network.
So you see the risk that there might be sort of a sleeping botnet which then suddenly wakes up and causes damage to the network.
Yes, so it starts with the network, but if let's say the network can handle this, then it can go farther. Okay, like mobile devices can be used, like you said in the beginning, to basically DDoS some government websites because people don't like certain regulations maybe, or organizations. Okay, so that's according to us, it's a best place to basically stop those threats, okay, to monitor and basically stop them, and also notify and act, somehow remediate. But I think we're gonna go to that part later. We are also working with public cloud vendors like Pets Company. More and more service providers, they are moving basically from the local telco clouds, and they are adopting platforms like, for example, from Google, and then they are just like tenants. They are basically putting 5G workloads over there. So then the security landscape changes a little bit, and then you need to basically make sure that everything is let's say, in line with expectations when it comes to the platform, and then you need to secure the workloads as well. Then there is also the question of split responsibility, right? Because now you have someone who's managing a platform, you have someone who's responsible for the network functions, you have someone who's responsible for security, and then if it's like a vanilla deployment from a single vendor, it's much easier. But if you have a Frankenstein in the cloud, basically, each network function comes from a different vendor, then the split responsibility,
It's a challenge, yeah.
I know it is supposed to be shared, but I call it split. You have a split responsibility, then security becomes a very important factor.
I think responsibility is a very important factor, this responsibility split also because the ecosystem is now much more complex. With Open RAN, which splits up the radio access network further, it's even more important because you might have even more parties in the stew. And I think one important cornerstone will be the cloud. And I just heard this morning from an incident, for example, where there was an earthquake, then a fire broke out, and then sort of, because it was on-site cloud, then there were some issues. So maybe, Peter, you can tell us something about how do you mitigate these kind of, or what kind of things do you see with regard to how to secure the underlying cloud so that the 5G that runs on top of it really is resilient to, let's say, these kind of physical events like floodings, fires, earthquakes, whatever?
So we have been talking about the edge, now we're going to talk about the core. Because 25% of the traffic of the internet going to our data centers. That's the reality, and our responsibility is even higher. And with the 5G and Internet of Things, all of this information coming from the sensor, the amount of information has been increased. We have a billions of users. Just to give you an example, per day we are trying to protect 400 million Android devices. And our responsibility for the Gmail is even higher. I'm not talking about the YouTube and everything what is going on. But because we are here talking about the 5G, I would like to say that we are building out security, it's built in. We're working only with the trust vendors. We have a special encryption. We divide information on chunks. Those chunks have a keys. We encrypt the keys as well. So all of this process is very, very robust.
But what kind of threats do you actually see? What kind of disasters do you see?
I can tell you, just when I saw the name of our panel, I was thinking that I'm watching the news on the CNN, on BBC those days, unfortunately. And I am not joking. So you need to know that everything was started about a year ago, what we have here in Eastern Europe. Increase of the attack from 8% average went to the level of 22, 23, even 25%.
Okay, that's quite a
And
bit, yeah.
that's a quite significant. We are working with the governments to having with them a common cybersecurity strategy. We call this Cyber Shield, where we have a couple of products which are helping the government to protect themselves. Because many people understand cybersecurity like you hire some smart people and they protect you. Actually, this is not true. The reality is that you need to exchange information. What you need to do, you need to analyze that information. You need to analyze your network for vulnerability. And based on all of that information, using the AI, making the prediction of the next attack. Or eventually trying to find the weak places.
So you suggest basically AI as a way to detect incidents, and I think one of the major problems is that security very often is the people are flooded by false positives, and you suggest that AI could be potentially one way to assist these
I don't suggest particular...
root out the sort of real disaster from a sort of false positive.
So let me tell you, I believe that AI now is a buzzword. People are using it for whatever. But there is some very difficult informational challenges, and cybersecurity is one of them, where this is quite applicable. Because, as I said, exchange the information between the governments, between the agencies, with cybersecurity operational centers is even more important to know the nature of attacks, to know from which IP addresses they're coming. This is exchange of information. Communication should go. And that's the most important thing on the cybersecurity. Many people think that you need to hire some hacker to help you to fight against another hacker. This is a very simplistic way. It is an integral process which you really need to manage together, and cooperation is a keyword. That's all from my side.
Okay, thanks a lot. So, and then we come to frequent. What kind of security requirements do you have? I mean, for you, you see other kinds of incidents and events than probably your colleagues here on the floor. And on the other hand, you're a critical supplier in the sense for many, with the new EU NIS2 directive, you're a supplier to airports and things like that, which are all critical entities, which means they are very sensitive customers, so they have quite a high expectations probably when it comes to security. So what kind of events do you see or anticipate where you would say, yeah, this should be done by the network because I mean, airport providers, they don't care too much about sort of if they use 4G, 5G or whatever, or Wi-Fi. They just want to sort of have a secure network. So
Yeah, I mean, for us, and that's a little bit not unique in the industry, but we are relying on a lot of different technologies. When we talk about air traffic management, we are not, saying, this is Latvia, this is Poland, this is Germany, so everything needs to go hand in hand. At the moment, we have about worldwide 36,000 flights in the air. They all need to be coordinated. That means when an aircraft leaves today here, later I'm flying back to Munich, the gate needs to be ready, the route needs to be ready, it needs to be safe. That means we need separation in the air, I need a flight level. It requires a lot of communication and coordination. And therefore we cannot rely on a single technology because we're flying also into Africa.
yeah.
That
So
means
reliability is one of the key-
reliability. And in a lot of these countries, we're talking a lot of times about, Europe and Central Europe and maybe North America and parts of Asia where we have a kind of perfect infrastructure. But for us, we're serving clients all the way down to South Africa, all the way to Australia, all the way to South America, where we need not only cable, because they're not in place, we need satellite communications, where we're facing attacks from jammers. Yeah, for example, they're interfering with the signal on the satellite, which would not bring any communication back to the controller then. And in the event that the controller is not able to talk to the pilot anymore, that's a big problem. We need to increase separation. In the worst event, we would even have to put all the aircrafts down or fly alternative routes. So that said, there's a lot of different technologies in place, but funny enough, we face a lot of more things like theft. As you know from Rohde and Schwarz, these radio repeaters, as we're using them today, they're at strategical, very important locations. For example, on a mountaintop, where you don't get a cable, where you don't get a satellite communication in the worst case. Sometimes, and then we have to put UPSs, diesel generators there. And in parts of the world, diesel at the moment is very appealing to people to break in and steal the diesel. So it's a complete different set of requirements, but of course also the cybersecurity part. And what is appealing to us then is if we have providers in place that have a global coverage. That means if an attack is happening today in Asia, I can inform my clients already in South America, be cautious and be ready that something is happening. And in the worst event, we can already put new software in place and so forth. And that's another topic for us, that software updates, changing of software is not possible in my area that often, because when we have to interrupt, air traffic needs to stop.
Yeah.
And that brings a lot of challenges to the whole thing with updating and new software and so forth. So it's a lot of different technologies and a lot of different problems that come with these incidents, yeah? If it's bad weather and so forth.
Yeah, but it's interesting to see sort of because you have a very specific requirement, but they are sort of, on the other hand, I heard, for example, that for the tsunami warning, sort of this kind of public warning system, one of the key challenges was actually that also there's the sensors and the power generation for those tsunami warning were just stolen and needed to be replaced. So
yeah, just a quick example, when in the Caribbean, the hurricane strike, and everything is flooded, the airport was down. And as long as the airport communication is not re-established, aircrafts cannot fly in and bring goods to the people like water and so forth, what they need. So we need systems that we can re-establish fairly quick. We spoke to large telco providers. It took them weeks to get their communication back up again. And then we established VSAT satellite systems to set them up really quickly with communication systems so the aircraft could talk again to the controller on the ground, and then also the aircrafts coming in for the support could land immediately again. Yeah.
So basically through cooperation could be sort of one way with partner operators, with governments, or sort of other ways sort of to mitigate and ensure these kind of reliance aspects.
Exactly.
So, but on the threat intelligence is also maybe Roland can tell us something about that section.
Sure, absolutely. And actually for context, I think I should say first that the area of security risk from ENEA's vantage point is probably the most neglected corner of cybersecurity, historically speaking. And yet it's systemically important, and indeed has been mentioned on the stage already, which is mobile signaling security and the range of threats and impacts there go from fraud, as I mentioned, to other state-level threats involving cyber surveillance and targeting. And the impacts can be large-scale and disruptive. Some of those that people would be familiar with, based on numerous media reports in recent years, are so-called signaling storms. These commonly attributed to benign, or let's say non-malicious causes. But what's really important to recognize when it comes to mobile signaling security is that as a totality, it is arguably an area of unexpected threat event, insofar as it has been a gap in many cybersecurity frameworks historically, and still is so today. A gap in capability and coverage for mobile operators, and therefore absent from the competencies of national certs, therefore absent from national threat pictures. Now, there are a number of reasons as to how we got there, but for today's discussion, the point is that's where we are, and it is changing, however. There's greater recognition of the importance of integrating mobile signaling security in an aligned way into a more coherent, more comprehensive, broader approach to cyber resilience and indeed national cyber security, vividly demonstrated by the defense of Ukraine against Russia, the Russian invasion, and the measures undertaken by Ukrainian operators and their approach to cybersecurity, but not only on the battlefield in Ukraine, by other countries as well. And I can actually sum or illustrate the kind of threat by making reference to an example of a very mature regulatory framework and approach, which is the UK's and their new Telecom Security Act, in which one of the clear objectives is about preventing unauthorized access, interference, or exploitation of mobile network services or data. That sums really the kind of impacts that are possible over mobile signaling. And even in the analysis released leading up to the new act released by the NCSE, the most simple but profound language highlighting that and even explaining that mobile signaling threats need to be viewed in the same way that we're with the conventionally familiar threats, such as malicious IP traffic. Because to attackers, they don't care about protocols, they care about access. And from their point of view, this is another tool that they can use. As to the impacts that we see, I mentioned these can be large-scale unexpected events and can be disruptive, such as signaling storms for non-malicious reasons. These are typically triggered by an unexpected network error, results in cascading effects, and then a spike in signaling, overloading the control plane. This area has been mentioned already on the stage. But a lot of research has shown that, and even in 5G, new as it is, that there are many ways attackers can induce effectively a distributed denial of service by overloading the control plane in 5G. And you mentioned a sleeping botnet a moment ago, Silke. Research has pointed to how attackers can effectively create botnets by compromising devices and then manipulating those to generate the spikes in signaling, for example. But actually what I'd really like to draw attention today is the non-disruptive impacts that can be achieved over signaling by attackers that are relevant to this discussion because they're not only large in scale, but they have societal impacts. And further context, so in EA, we provide mobile signaling protection to operators and associated services to government customers as well, national cybersecurities worldwide. And we have global deployments in many markets. And what that's given us is a window onto a global threat landscape, which is really important to signaling because we quickly realized as our coverage grew that attackers that have won the access and the tools and to the competence and the expertise to exploit signaling engage in global operations. And I don't just mean attacks in many countries, I mean global campaigns. And that's particularly important in Cillian today, as we sit here, in respect of legacy protocols. And the ability for attackers to exploit signaling is obviously, it's vitally important not to lose sight of that, even in the context of legacy protocols, as we deal with everything that attaches to 5G and the signaling challenges that are already identified there.
Yeah, I think there are different kind of attack possibilities or disruption possibilities. One is, of course, the obvious, it's in denial of service through on the signaling plane, of course, and the other are sort of a bit more subtle, but they might have still quite some societal impact in the sense of location tracking of military personnel or data traffic rerouting and things like that. So they usually don't break a network, and they're a bit more subtle, but the impacts might be still sort of for a society point, which tries to defend itself or something, quite severe. And there also sort of preparation and reaction is an important point. So which brings me to the next area, sort of, how can we react? What kind of things can we do in advance to improve the resilience of networks against whatever kind of attacks? I mean, each of us has a different expertise area. Sort of, maybe just throw it in here. Sort of, what can we do actually? Sort of, now we know what's going to hit us, or most likely to hit us. There's always something we won't know, which will come from there. What can we do? Sort of. Just the floor open here, sort of, whoever wants to start.
So I think what we have seen here right now, so there are different threats and, let's say, different kind of reactions we have to guarantee. And I think, for example, talking about the disaster and recovery plan and so on, in my opinion, we are talking about the full stuff of backhauling, right, in terms of the IP backbone stuff, in the same way than, for example, things like public safety and very, very clear critical mission or mission critical stuff and so on. So I think there must be a plan in place, a very, very clear recovery plan in place, knowing about the different situations and so on, how to cope with and how to react and do it immediately. So I think from a different angle, there are different solutions in place, but they're talking about the cloud solution, or for example, from us, things like mobile in terms of air traffic control and so on. In the same way, I think for public authorities and so on, the regulators locally, so there's a bunch of people involved to everything to that. You mentioned, for example, the tsunami or, for example, earthquake situation and so on. So how to give pressure exactly on these things to resolve the problem, and how to manage the people in the right way with the different kind of technologies. And I think that's what we are looking for, what we can see so far and so on. And I think it's not only a question of one person, of one party along the line of supply chain, whatever. I think it's a very, very clear collaboration, and you have to train this.
So how do you see in general sort of potentially, let's say, satellites for, let's say, if cable breaks, sort of how do you see the role of the satellite? Because we see it nowadays in Ukraine, we see it also sort of, for example, I know Taiwan is sort of quite looking at satellite communication as a, let's say, plan B. And so how do you feel that satellite communication, which role it's going to play in the future? So any views there?
I mean, from my point of view, you have to look into the constellations, and that would now get very technical, I would say. But we have geostationary systems and we have low orbit systems. They serve different purposes. They have different coverage and they have different throughputs. So there's a couple of things what determines which is the right system. For us today, we're using so-called geostationary systems normally for the main applications because they are very reliable. They ensure throughputs, but most of all, they have the highest availability, which is key for us. The throughputs, they're a little bit less, but knowing in our industry, the throughputs that we require today, they are not so high, but will grow in the future. Yeah? So in the defense field, and especially when talking not just about air defense, it might be different. They use different frequency bands again, like X band and Ka band, that's a protected band again. So yes, it will be play a role, and for us, and that was where your question started, I think, how to be ready for such attacks. What is happening and what we are doing is we're using a lot of different technologies. So we are not relying on terrestrial, on cable. So
basically having a lot of plans B in place.
Exactly. There's satellite links, there is microwave links, could be 5G, depending on the type of communication. If it is a ground-ground, controller to controller, fine. Controller to aircraft, a little bit more tricky. Anyhow, we have a lot of different technologies, and we're using mechanisms where we're checking on traffic pattern, for example. And when we see there is an anomaly in the traffic, we can, on a very granular way, reroute traffic to alternative passes and maybe even shut down then certain passes. And that is, of course, one thing. And the start of all of it should be a risk analysis.
Yeah. I think defense can learn a lot from your experience. I think they will face very similar issues as you do. So they will also have a mix of technologies and possibilities. So, but one approach, for example, to deal with load is, for example, if there's a botnet attacking or something, to increase to solve this via virtualization. And how do you see that? So this is to both of you.
So, unfortunately, we cannot change the technology, especially for our data centers, because the speed of the data that is coming and the amount of data and users are enormous. So we're relying on the optical cables, and you probably know, maybe not, because this is very important. All of our data centers, we own our optical cables. So we are one of the largest service providers ourselves. And when we build it, the data region, this is how we call it, it's always have a structure of so-called a triangle, where you have a replication and backup together with the main data center. Geographically, they should be located on the distance, so when the natural disaster or another disaster is coming, you have them not impacted, all of them. This is very, very normal for this industry, so to rely on such things. And again, we have a very strict procedures how to do that, which I'm not aware entirely, which is good, but matter of fact. And that's what is happening in our world.
Yeah. I think sort of one important aspect that was already mentioned several times, I think, is the preparedness in terms of that. Very often, for example, I think all of us got these SMS spamming attack at some point of time. And usually they start with one country and then they sort of add language libraries and then they go for the smaller countries. So I think threat intelligence and threat sharing is an important aspect in the sort of be prepared for various kind of disasters coming from the, let's say, application layer mostly. So maybe on threat intelligence, threat sharing, how do you see these sort of Rohde and Piotr.
Exercise in Poland a couple of years ago, and it was each vertical basically had to exercise that they are under attack, like banks and then service providers. And it was quite interesting observation that actually the service provider guys, they were the quickest with sharing threat intelligence data, just because they know each other from some external trainings.
So it's trust, basically.
Yeah, and they were just picking up the phone and say, hey, listen, I think, we found something in a router, there is some vulnerability. Have you spotted the same stuff? He's like, yeah, exactly. Come on, let's call the vendor. And, it was all like a war game, okay? They were all playing, basically, but this was the most efficient way of basically dealing with the attack, right? Our company, we are seeing billions of malware samples a day, billions, okay? We are basically detonating them in sandboxing, and we are analyzing, because malware is not just about the file, it's about everything that it does when it's executed, okay? What it is contacting, what it is downloading, what it is executing. And based on all this information from each malware sample, we are basically leveraging the AI and machine learning to basically build threat intelligence data. And we constantly push them to our basically products deployed at our customers.
Okay.
So the products, they become just like a control mechanism that is basically on site. But everything else is happening in the cloud, and then there's the analytics, the machine learning, and basically we just keep pushing.
I think that's a very important point for Europe, basically, to have European resilience. So sort of something.
Sure, yeah. Calls for greater and better intelligence sharing, threat information sharing are always merited and are always important. When it comes to mobile signaling, however, threat intelligence, there's actually a very important additional consideration, which, given the fact that it has been historically a neglected area of cybersecurity, as it wasn't included in many approaches to cybersecurity, we can't presume that the capability to produce the intelligence is actually there in the first place, that there are the insights actually to be shared. So from our perspective, and what we see globally, is that the problem with threat insight and information sharing isn't one of propagation right now when it comes to mobile signaling threats, it's one of production. The capability needs to be there to actually generate these insights for operators.
To understand the attack.
Yeah. To make threats visible. So I think and this goes to your previous question, well, what can be done? It's really about getting the basics right. The majority of mobile operators today have signaling firewalls deployed, but are they configured correctly? And this isn't, the GSMA have highlighted the importance of this additional element in their current security landscape report, which is deploying firewalls and ensuring that they're correctly configured. And as to what the basics look like, of course, and I do want to acknowledge the important efforts of the GSMA and the NISA, actually, and repeated invocations to help address and draw attention to these issues for years. Implementing GSMA guidelines on signaling security and interconnect security measures are extremely important, but then you must build on those, because what is really counterintuitive for many is that how much an art there is in the mobile signaling attack, state of the art, even for legacy protocols. So it's about addressing that knowledge asymmetry that actually exists today, getting the basics right and making life harder for attackers without striving for perfect security.
Thank you. So money is always short, as we know, and that's also true for security and IT departments. So each of you, one security measure that you would say is the most important you see for the preparedness element. So what do you see, sort of, each of you would see as sort of the most crucial element, sort of how you can prepare for a disaster?
I think you have a very, very clear set of KPIs, let's say, along the entire chain of your network. And I think to have monitored exactly this very, very, let's say, challenging list of KPI, what kind of ever network we are talking about, mission critical, whatever, and so on.
Okay, so having security KPIs in place and monitor them properly. Okay, what's the next one?
I think it's, well, security is seen as a necessity, a necessary cost, or it could be an enabler. Imagine monetization of security. You have to have it in place, but you can sell it as a service. Okay, and then the third aspect would be someone who would enforce this certain security measures. Okay, so the government regulations definitely.
Okay, security enforcement, and also sort of seeing not security as just a OPEX, but also as a sort of business enabler. I think Google was pretty good on that one, actually. So I think you have quite a range of services in that area. So
what I would say is only one word: zero trust.
Perfect. That's a good point. Exactly. So.
Risk assessment and collaboration, and I think that's a part that is really important, especially in mission critical environments. And when I say collaboration, I mean not only the industry and the customers, but also the regulators, that they work very closely together and come up with the right measurements if an event happens.
Yeah, going here, there. Yep.
A specific measure, and if called to one, I would say implementing bidirectional filtering for mobile operators. In other words, not just monitoring inbound signaling for potentially malicious or high-risk traffic, but also outbound signaling, which is often an absent element. Why do that? Because it's vitally important that operators know their own networks, and that can help, in the absence of all else, quite immediately identify any bypass vulnerabilities, help them understand their exposure to the risk and the state of the art of attackers, and of course the risk of data leakage, which is the other side of the coin of mobile signaling.
I think that's a good point, sort of know when you lost data, sort of that you monitor what's going out. Okay, thank you. I think we have time for one or two questions from the audience and from the online community. So I must say I'm a bit blinded here, so you have to do some serious
There's one
waving.
question, but we really are short on time, so quickly, a quick question and quick answer from one or two of you, and then we need to wrap it up.
Thank you.
Hello, sir.
Thank you. I don't know, maybe you will take it as a note. Some 15 years ago, I met Kevin Mitnick in one of the conferences devoted to the InfoSec. And he was giving us also the presentation about the technical part. But the main, how to say, focus on his speech was devoted to the social engineering, what I haven't heard. Maybe I missed something, but about this. Thank you.
Social engineering. Any quick thoughts?
I can talk. The most social engineering you see today is SIM swap. Basically, you go to the shop of the operator and convince them you have lost your phone, and then you hijack. Basically, you get a new SIM card, and then via that get the one-time passwords to access and email account. So, which basically means there need to be processes in place at the sales personnel. It needs to be educated, and that's the most common social engineering attack you see today. So in telco space. So. basically it boils down to training of people.
Sounds like a good topic to ponder over dinner that is following this session. So I want you to give a round of applause to Roland, Matthias, Peter, Piotr, Olaf, and Silke for the